DC Pride, which is a collection of stories which is celebrating Pride Month, and all these stories are featuring one of the DC characters that are a member of the LGBTQ plus community. I always get the letters all mixed up, so I always like, oh, the people from the Pride community, yeah, all that. Anyway, and what I would say, me who's just finished reading it, I would say this: if you're a person who's heavily in this community, you're going to love it. I mean, absolutely. And me who, expects, who who expects people in that community, I was like reading it, and I'm like, this is just well written. The characters are fleshed out. I mean, even characters that I have never read before, like Nightwalk, Midnighter, and the new, like, the Future State Flash, I never read, and I know these were written. Even though the Flash one, I didn't, it didn't click with me as well, which is called Close Makeup Gift. And even if these stories pretty much fall in the same category, they're all well written. And when I mean the same category, as in, here's your hero, here's your villain, they fight said villain, and there's your story. But most of them are just still well written. I mean, there's a couple of different ones, even if there is a couple of different ones. Like, the ones that stand out to me is one called, this is the first one out of the bat, which is a Batwoman story, called the Wrong Side of the Looking Glass. And it's her basically telling her childhood in a way, and how, in a society, children are kind of told there's certain rules and there's certain things, and, you should follow these said rules. And she was always the person who kind of didn't follow the rules, and she never really followed them. And, there's this wonderful scene where she says that, girls at school would talk about boys, and I didn't really care about that, but I wanted them to actually talk about me. And I was like, this is a really well written, really well, like, heartfelt, and it's a very quick read, but it's heartfelt, full of emotion, all that kind of stuff. And it's really well put together. And then you get, as I said, by the look of which is the Midnight Story, and, Try to Go, which is the Evasive Tour question story, which is essentially, Evasive Tour, as the question, tries to fights the bad guys and gets to go. She gets to go at the end. But one that did stood out for me, and probably just because I'm a sucker with these two characters, is one called Another Word for Truck is to Move Your Keister, I think it's called. And it is the Harley Quinn Poison Ivy one. And it's fun because it's the same, but it's a one that's full of humor, it's full of laughter, it's a lot of a lot of humor on there, but there's a lot of depth towards it, because essentially what it is clearly at some point Poison Ivy and Harley Quinn create this massive, like, monster plant creature, but while Harley Quinn's trying to focus on that in her way, Ivy is like, wait, we need to talk about us, because they're if you're not aware, they two are a thing. And she's like, what are we? Like, seriously, what are we? Like, am I just a fling? Am I like a shoulder that you cry on every time that you leave your Mr. J? Like, what are we actually a thing? What are we actually? And I love this line. It's a comedic line, which is, we fight crime, we have sex, and we share 2 streaming services. But you realize in that humor, and even with, like, Harley kind of trying to go, ooh, let me guess. There's that whole thing of, like, what are we? And of course, the end, they are actually a couple. And what you find is it's just Harley is worried that it's going to be Joker 2.0 all over again, and doesn't want to have her heart broken again. It's kind of like, I'm like, this is good in this kind of humor size. He's the Light of My Life, which is a Green Lantern story about his son's reaction, finding out that his father's gay and he's also a Green Lantern. That was good. That was fine. That essentially just telling the story in a bit of like, hey, if you were gay back when I was your age, I would be in jail. But that whole thing. But that was well written. I mentioned I didn't really click with Chloe's Make Off Gift, which is the Flash one. Also the Piper one, which is because there wasn't really much to it. It was like a copycat. And him stopping a crime, like some fat, business crime ball, and I was like, okay. But the one I talk about, now I will talk about the Aqualad one, which is called Love Life, but Date Night is the one I'm like, this is good. This is good. In like the fun, like, hey, here's your superheroes fighting, doing superhero things, and that. Which is the Dreamer story, which is a character who's been around in the Supergirl show, who's a transgender character, played by a transgender actress, and it's the comic debut of this character, and after reading that story, and funny enough, it is written by Nicole Maines, who, so it's a little bit meta, is, Dreamer, writing Dreamer, and I'm like, can we have I'm like, DC, I think I even tweeted this before doing this video. I'm like, DC, can we have like a 6-part miniseries on Dreamer? Like, can we? Like, because I'm like, this is pretty like fun, written, put together. Because every time you have, here's this, actor, here's probably a person that for not writing, you're like, okay, this might be the okay one. But funny enough, it was great. It was fun. Dreamer fighting the League of Assassins. That's kind of cool. Or the League of Shadows. And her trying to be at the date, trying to make on time with a date with Brainy, and you got all that kind of stuff. And the other one which I thought, which is, if you think about it, would be the Avengers, the big crescendo, which is the Aqualad one, which is essentially Aqualad and which is called Love Life, which is essentially, there's a moment where you have all of the Pride characters, because there's a Justice League queer. This is the JLQ. And they are teaming up, fighting the bad guys, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, this feels like a big Avengers moment, where you have, here's the Batwoman, here's the Dreamer, here's the Flash. We're seeing all of these Pride characters together. And even with the main story being Aqualad, who just came out, he's at his first Pride Parade, and he's kind of still don't know, like, he knows who he is, but he's still not comfortable with who he is, and all that, and it works absolutely well done. I mean, these stories are good, some are better than others, all that kind of stuff, but next year, maybe do a second one shot, and make this annual thing, DC, because this is really well put together. Don't do these short story stuff just for the anniversaries. Do it for this, because I always say a good story is a good story. It doesn't matter who the characters are, what's telling them. Just if it's well written, and